So it's interesting, what we're getting is a different voicing, I think, of the room. I feel like it's changing the picture in my mind of what the room looks like. And again, that's a hugely powerful thing. Maybe not for this track. I don't for a moment hear myself wanting room tone dominating the recording on this particular track. Hi everyone, welcome back to Green Rooms 1. Today we are looking at a group of different sessions, and we're now going to focus on the Lipa track that we have been recording as part of this process. So you've already hopefully seen the video, the John Mayer video, and seen the setup that we went through there. I'm now going to go through a bit the setup that we used for this track, some of which is the same. So there are some similarities there, and again you can refer back to the John Mayer video if you want a little bit more detail about some of those choices. I'm still going to go through them now, but not necessarily in quite as much detail. So we've still got our three kick-ins, we've still got the RE20, the 421 and the D112. They're all placed in the sort of front third of the kick drum, nearest the batter head of the kick drum. I find it's a good place if you want to get a good solid punchy sound on your kick drum. Again, we would expect very similar response from these three mics in terms of their tone, their transient response, the sort of sense of gesture that we get from these microphones, as we had in the first track. Though there is a distinct difference in the performance style here, both in terms of the way it's played and also obviously the nature of the song itself, the speed of the track, the space. So really we want more of that punch in this track. And again, hopefully you saw the Mayer video, and we found the 421 had a ton of that batter front to it, that real sense of punch. So again, I'm expecting that when we move to the session, that actually for this one, the 421, maybe with some low end EQ'd in to help it out a little bit, is really going to help, and hopefully in combination with the kick out, which has been moved for this session. And also the mic's been slightly changed. We had a U89 in the first session, we moved to a U87 in this session, and then it's been moved slightly further away to try and encourage a little bit more low end. So we'll have a listen to that mic in a moment and see if we achieved that with our mic move, to just make it a bit less sort of clacky and have a bit more of that low end, so it has more weight, give a sense of weight to our kick drum. I think it's also worth noting, and you'll see this when you look at the footage, that the physical environment around the kit has also changed. Now, that's not going to hugely change our kick-ins. Our kick-ins are shielded from that environment by the drum itself, but our kick-out is going to be affected by this change. And again, you'll see the baffles have all moved in because we want less spatial influence. We want, for this, a more poppy track. We want this to feel drier, more focused, and have less of that kind of space. We're not looking for the track to breathe. And in fact, with the length and nature of the reverb in this track, there's every chance it's going to fight our production rather than work with our production. So we went for a tighter environment. We also changed out the snare. So we moved to a second snare drum, and again was tuned more specifically for the track, to hopefully give us that kind of poppy backbeat sort of vibe that we wanted on this particular track. Snare-wise, again, exactly the same combination with the SM57, the KM184, and again, I'm expecting that 57 to be that kind of gut punch of sort of mid-range power. I'm expecting the 184 to give me much more slap and openness. And actually on this track, I feel like I might want to use both. I can see both working really well here. And again, they've been positioned to try and match up the diaphragms as close as possible. So again, we've got minimum difference in arrival time. There's that delta is kept to a minimum in order to minimize any opportunities for comb filtering that we get by having two waveforms arriving slightly out of time with each other. Snare bottom again is present. How much of it we'll need? It could be a good kind of punchy snap element, but also it could distract and make the snare feel too long. We'll find out when we have a listen. Tom's the same again with the 421s and the 414s in hypercardioid. Something I didn't mention in the last session, but we went for a hypercardioid polar pattern. Again, this is something for you to go and have a listen to. Try the different polar patterns on a 414 on a Tom. They actually sound different. It feels like a different mic, and I've always liked the sort of the wide cardioid or the hypercardioid as my two options I'll often go for on a Tom. I actually quite like the wide cardioid. I think it gives a very natural response, but see what you think. Overhead, this is where we've got a difference, and I'm not going to go into much detail in this part of the video because we're going to have a follow-up video where we do a bit more of a deep dive into the differences on these particular mics. But rather than having the same mics in multiple positions, we've got one core position, which is basically the modified recorder man brought in nice and tight from the previous session. And again, you'll see this in the footage that we'll be playing, but with 3 different pairs. So we've got the C414s, mics that we know already, and hopefully this is also going to give you some context by which to judge the first session. So when you're listening to that first session, you can now imagine, well, actually, what would it have sounded like if I'd used the 184s instead of the 414s in the position. So again, different types of comparison for you to make to take forward and influence the way that you're working. Again, just here to provide ideas, really. So we've got the 414s, the 184s, which are the small diaphragm Neumanns, and again, I'm expecting a sort of flatter response from the 414s in general. I find that they don't necessarily impose a character onto the recording. The 184 I find often does impose a character. It's got quite an interesting sort of frequency response to my ear. It's a bit of a love-hate one for me, and actually I very, very much like the one overhead, so have to see what you think about those ones. And then the last one is the pair of M147s. So we've got a large diaphragm in the 414, small diaphragm in the 184, both condenser microphone with a pretty clean signal path, really, although there is coloration in the 184. Then we move into the M147, which has a tube in the circuit, and to my ears is a more coloured mic. I mean, to me, it almost sounds, when we listen back to it, it almost sounds like there's some compression. But we'll come back to that when we focus on that in the upcoming video. Just wanted to give you a bit of insight. Then we've got a few mics that are different to the Mayer session, because I wanted to throw some other things in there. Again, not necessarily looking for a sound that the record needs, just showing you what potential sounds there are available in the room. And one of them we've called floor. And this is a mic that's literally, sort of probably this far off the floor, pointed at the floor, about 2 meters in front of the drum kit, maybe a little bit less actually. Probably 1.5 meters, let's say, from the snare drum, something like that. Pointed towards the floor, trying to capture all the energy off the floor in this case, because it sometimes can be a really interesting sound. So we'll have a quick listen to that in a moment. There's also 2 mono overheads, this time a U87 as a condenser and the Coles 4038 as a mono overhead. And again, they're placed in a similar place to where they were in the Mayer session. Then we did something a bit interesting. So we've got middle and side, and the middle mic is a 414 in cardioid, and then it's basically surrounded by microphones. So there is a side mic, which is a U89 as a side mic, and we've also got the Coles as a side mic. So they're both figure of 8 polar patterns to show you the difference when you manipulate the mic that's providing the side job to go from the ribbon to the condenser. Now we're expecting with the condenser, I think, more detail, more top end. With the ribbon, we're probably expecting a slightly more colourful sound with a smoother, more rolled off top end perhaps. But if it's anything like the previous Coles experiment that we did, we actually found ourselves getting a really great low end tone from the room. I'm probably expecting perhaps the 89 to sound wider as well, because it's got more top end detail, so I might get more of a perception of width from that. So let's have a look at those. I think we'll start with the floor mic as our first sort of mic to have a quick listen to. We'll have a quick listen to the our sort of middle and side combination mics, and then to finish with, we might just have a quick look at kick and snare and see what we can do about balancing out the kick in with the kick out, and then seeing whether a balance of the 184 and the 57 can work for this record, or whether we'd rather make a distinct choice of one of them. I think with the Mayer, actually the sort of recorder man overhead with the kick mic and a little bit of the 184 on the snare, and we were pretty much there. I didn't feel like we needed to add lots of mics. This one, I feel perhaps we are going to use a few more microphones to create our sort of final balance. So for interest, let's have a listen to this floor mic. So we've got our floor mic coming in first. Now I'd forgotten quite how that one sounded. Wow, yeah, so that kick is super punchy, but has an almost wooden kind of tone. So it'd be really interesting to see how that would take EQ. Maybe come in and have a go on the console with the EQ, or try with the plugin and the sessions then the session is available to download. So have a play with it and have a see what you think about the way that EQs, because that is a really snappy, punchy, woody kick drum sound. that would gate so easily. Everything else feels really distant and roomy. So it could be really nice having that space on the snare and all that punchy snap on the kick. Quite excited by that one. Really interesting microphone. Again, might be tricky to work in phase-wise, timing-wise, so you might like to do some alignment work on it. Again, something to have a look at around how to make the most of that microphone. So let's try our mid-sides now. So my mid-mic that I'm going to lift first here, and again I've just grouped in Pro Tools using the Command G command to create groups for my two pairs of sides. So this is my mid-mic. And there you go, 414s, they just sound like a mic in a studio to me. They're very, there's no surprises there. Super clean, smooth top end, tells me what's going on. And I'm going to add now the Coles 4038 as the side pair to this mid. Now actually we might have to do a little tiny bit of alignment work here. I'm getting a little bit of flamming on the snare, which is interesting. But I'm going to swap now to the U89. So let's just see what happens to the image. That's what we're going to focus on for now. That was all of that. So it's interesting, what we're getting is a different voicing, I think, of the room. I feel like it's changing the picture in my mind of what the room looks like. And again, that's a hugely powerful thing. Maybe not for this track. I don't for a moment hear myself wanting room tone dominating the recording on this particular track. But on other tracks I might want to work on, I think being able to voice the shape of the colour of my room, to redraw a picture of the performance space using a microphone choice, to me that's very exciting. So if you understand the polar patterns, you understand the frequency response, you understand the transient response, and you can identify these and hear them, then you can start to make these decisions. The old favourite corridor mic is still in play. That's still its explosive self, which is always good fun. So now what we're going to do is we're going to have a quick look at these kick-ins and see if we can build ourselves a balance. So my RE20, good solid, meaty thump with no mess. Whew. A 41 is punchy. The 41 is pure punch, which I think on this track is going to really help me. A D112, that sort of bouncing ball thing. So again, very typical of that D112 slightly rockier sound. For me, that's a no-go on this particular record. And let's have a quick look at this kick out as well, to see if we did end up with more bass. There is some real low sub in there, but it needs bringing out with an EQ. So for now, I'm just going to focus on my 41, I think, for that punch. And we're going to try and add a bit of that mic in with it, see what happens. Now with no EQ at all, that is adding a whole world of meaty punch. What we can do with EQ, I'm not going to share with you now, because we've got another video coming up a bit later where we look at the Stormzy track, where we do go in and process quite aggressively with some SSL EQ to show you what can be achieved on a 421 using EQ. So have a look at that video a bit later on for that one. But for now, I'm quite happy with that punch. So I'm going to try and add a bit of 57. That's super tight and punchy. Add the 184. So that the kick drum's like oof, and the snare's like oof. I want oof, ah, oof. I want the same level of energy in both. And the 57 for me has got way more of that energy that matches the kick drum. So again here, I'm thinking about the record, but I'm also thinking about the performance. I want this to feel coherent as a single performance. And to me, the energy of the 57 matches that 41-87 combination much better than that which we're getting from the 184. But it is a little boxy. So we're going to add a little bit, then we could EQ that out. but we're going to add a little bit of this 184 air and snap, see if it balances out. Yes, it's a bit mid-range rich, the 57, but to me that is very coherent. And just for the sake of the balance, we're going to just add a little pair of overheads in here to see what we're achieving with our overall balance. That's punchy, it's tight, it's dry. And one thing to note is the faders are much lower on my overheads than they were in the Mayor track. The Mayor track, for me, you build from the overheads, you build from the image of the drum kit. Here, I want to build from that poont, pat, poof. Maybe I want to ride these in certain sections. We're going to talk in a video shortly about some other influences that came into play when we started to record this track that might see us make a slight change to this balance. But for now, in terms of that raw kick snare groove, very happy with what we've got there so far. Join us again soon. We're going to do a bit of a deep dive into the mic pre's, but before we do that, as I say, we're going to have a little look at the influence of the producer actually in this session as somebody modifying and enhancing performance.